What's going on, everybody? In today's video, I'm going to look at Nndm or Nano Dimension. They just reported earnings, and we have some things to look over on the chart as well. Now, I haven't covered this stock probably in a couple of months now, but I received a couple of comments mentioning earnings, so we're going to take a look at it. So if you guys like these Nndm videos, make sure you hit the like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I'll try to cover Nano Dimension more moving forwards. Now, let's go take a look at what they reported for earnings. So first off, this is rallying. It's up about 15% as of this upload. They had a record revenue quarter, and they also reported GAAP positive EPS. And GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. This is not non-GAAP. This is in fact a GAAP positive EPS. But looking over this, their gross margins increased to 44% from, I believe, 37%. And they said this is the best quarter in the company's history with a 50% organic revenue growth since Q3 of 2022. And this is really good right here as well. The company plans to continue its share buyback program. And their record revenue of nearly $15 million for Q1 of 2023 is an increase of 43% over Q1 of 2022, so year over year, and 24% over the previous quarter. As for gross margin, they're at 44%, whereas year over year, they're at 10%. So they've definitely increased their margins by a lot. And they did report an income, $22 million income, whereas last quarter, they were negative $87 million. And year over year, they're negative $34 million. Now, what do you guys think about them reaching profitability now? Do you think this is going to continue as the quarters progress, or are we going to get back to a negative EPS and this was just a fluke? Let me know what you think down below. Now, let's look at what the CEO says about this. We delivered significant revenue growth in the first quarter of 2023 with the third record-setting quarter in a row. That's pretty good. Defined by exceptional performance and steady quarterly organic growth since July of 2022. While we still have 6 months left to go in 2023, at this point we hope to be ahead of the annual budget, which our board of directors has set for us. And he says that one of the most exciting developments this quarter is the adoption of deep learning / AI technology developed by their DeepCube division. It's now installed on newer models of machines, which advance industrial inspection, print quality optimization, process optimization, and monitoring and maintenance of machines. And he goes on to say that while DeepCube is a significant value add to new and existing customers, we're starting to receive requests from industrial customers to sell them the DeepCube Engine AI just by itself, which these industrial customers can install on their own machines, which turns Nano Dimension's DeepCube group into a standalone revenue generating division. I think that's actually pretty big. Now, I did want to skip down a little bit. He mentions a couple of other small things, but looking at sales and marketing expenses actually came down 7.4 million compared to 9.7 million in the previous quarter and 9.3 million in the first quarter of 2022, so year over year. That's pretty good that as the company grows revenue, their sales and marketing has actually come down. Typically, as a company grows revenue, their marketing increases as well as time goes by, their R&D increases, things like that. Now, speaking of R&D, their R&D expenses were 19 million compared to nearly 21 million in the fourth quarter of 2022. So it did decrease quarter over quarter, but it did increase year over year. Their year ago number was nearly 18 million, 17.8 million. And they say the decrease compared to the fourth quarter is mainly attributed to a decrease in materials expenses and payroll and related expenses. Now, jumping over to assets, this is in the thousands. They do have 1,022 million of current total assets with a cash balance of $412 million. Now, as for liabilities, debt, things of that nature, they're sitting at 49 million. So you'll notice that they have a lot more assets, a lot more cash on hand as well than their debt, which is a great thing. Now, I also wanted to mention something else that wasn't really mentioned in the earnings here. They did increase their offer price for Stratasys for the shares to $20.05 per share in cash. Now, you long-term investors in this know that Nano Dimension is trying to acquire Stratasys, and I recommend you check out Yoav Stern, that's the CEO. Check out his YouTube as well. He does post relatively frequently, and he does cover this in better detail. But I did want to add that they increased this offer essentially from 18 to 20 per share in cash. But I also wanted to add here that the percentage of Stratasys shares that are being sought in this offer, meaning the shares that Nano Dimension is trying to acquire from Stratasys, is going from between 38.8% and 40% to between 31.9 to 36%. So it's a higher price, but it's less shares that they're trying to acquire now, it looks like. And for some reason it isn't mentioned on here. I must have been looking at this somewhere else. but I believe currently they do have about 14% of ownership of Stratasys. So that would essentially almost give them the 50% ownership of Stratasys. I think their goal is to at least acquire more than 50% ownership, but I definitely have more to look at there. There's a lot going on with the Stratasys acquisition or attempt of acquisition. Now, looking at the chart, first off, I did want to show you guys what their earnings typically looks like, at least for revenue. Typically, we don't see profit. This is one of the first times we saw actual profit here, and not just a non-GAAP, an actual GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. You know, the difference between non-GAAP and GAAP, there are things you can add or leave out, so that does kind of change the numbers. It skews things a little bit. So companies can kind of manipulate things so that it looks profitable when the GAAP is not profitable. But this is GAAP profitable, a positive GAAP EPS. But you'll see revenue growth over time is relatively consistent. There are some lapses quarter over quarter where you see a decrease in revenue, and then next quarter you see an increase. But generally year over year, we see pretty huge revenue growth. And going back into 2021, you'll see that they're reporting 1 million in revenue, 800,000 in revenue, and things really started to ramp up in 2022. Just wanted to add that information here. Now looking at the chart, you'll see that it did gap up on earnings. So it may come back down potentially, fill that gap at 240. Most gaps do get filled, but not all. And looking at the EMAs, you'll see the EMAs are starting to curl upwards. They are still bearish with the 200 on top of the 100 on top of the 50. One thing I am watching for, if we don't start pulling down to fill this gap, is if we do continue upwards, I'm watching for the 50 to flip the 100. And then for the 50 to flip the 200. And moving over to the moving averages rather than the EMAs, you'll see that they are still bearish with the 200 on top of the 50. But remember that the EMAs and the moving averages are all lagging indicators. And as things move upwards, these can potentially cross, further bringing more buying pressure. Now, one thing I wanted to add that I mentioned from time to time is May 11 lows. There are some companies that have held up their May 11 lows. This is not one of them. However, it isn't drastically under its May 11 lows like some stocks like Nano, for instance, among others. It just briefly went under its May 11 low and was quickly bought back. And it actually utilized its May 11 low right here in June of 2023. And zooming out, when you look at these lows, it certainly looks like a reverse head and shoulders. You've got the head here, the shoulder, and the shoulder. I think that's kind of interesting there. Now, one thing I'm going to continue to keep an eye on here is the volume. I want to see the volume start really increasing, ramping up. People start talking about this, talking about how they're profitable, talking about the increased revenue, but seeing that increased volume, that would certainly be a good sign. On the daily, we are not overbought yet on the RSI. Going to closer time frames, going to 4 hours, what have you, it starts becoming overbought and actually giving an indication to sell. However, one thing that can happen is it can just start trading sideways, which would bring the RSI down towards neutral without necessarily selling off. Without seeing the price drop much, this can start trading sideways and the RSI will go from being so overbought to being relatively neutral. Now, zooming into closer time frames, you'll see it's trying to set up here. I would watch this pattern here. If we see a break of right around 260, we'll probably drop more. Now, we have seen shadows or wicks above this level, but I do think a good break of 276 could give us a further move upwards. But what I could see, at least today and the next couple of days, is probably a little sideways action and then a breakout to either direction. So keep an eye on these levels. And now that we are above the 50 and 200 MA, as long as this kind of continues, doesn't dramatically drop, we should see these start rising and potentially see a golden cross here. But that's all I got for now for you guys. I definitely want to listen to their earnings call. There's going to be a lot of good information. They'll likely clarify a few things. And of course, there'll probably be some interesting questions in the Q&A and some things that aren't really mentioned in their actual earnings report. But thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you think about Nano Dimension down below, and I'll catch you later.